The laughter rolled through the courtroom like thunder. Judge Harrison Foster leaned back in his chair, wiping tears of amusement from his eyes. 9 languages? He repeated, chuckling. Miss Williams, this is a court of law, not a talent show. In front of him stood Kesha Williams, 24 years old, wrists cuffed, eyes steady. Accused of forging diplomas to work as a translator for multinational companies, she had been dragged from her small Atlanta home 3 days earlier, humiliated before cameras, neighbors, and an entire nation eager for scandal. Your Honor, said Prosecutor Marcus Thompson, his smirk polished as his suit. The defendant claims to be fluent in English, Spanish, French, Mandarin, Arabic, German, Russian, Japanese, and Portuguese. 9 languages. Yet she has no college degree, only a high school education. The fraud speaks for itself, the courtroom murmured. Kesha's expression didn't change. It's true, she said softly. I don't have a degree, but I never lied about what I can do. Foster's smile vanished. Miss Williams, I suggest you stop embarrassing yourself. We have evidence you charged thousands for translations you clearly couldn't provide. With all due respect, she replied, her voice calm but firm. You're judging me without hearing me out. If you'll allow me, I can prove it. Foster laughed again. Prove it? What are you going to do? Sing the alphabet in Chinese. From the front row, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Kesha's defense attorney, rose to her feet. Your Honor, my client has the right to demonstrate her skills. If she claims fluency, why not test her? Because it's ridiculous, Foster snapped. Look at her, a young black woman, no higher education, raised in the suburbs. How the hell would she speak 9 languages? The words landed like a bomb. The courtroom fell silent. Journalists exchanged stunned looks. Every camera caught it, a judge's racist remark, broadcast live, but Kesha didn't flinch. Her eyes sharpened, her tone cool as steel. Your Honor, you just proved why I'm here. Not because I lied about what I can do, but because people like me are never believed when we're extraordinary. For the first time, Foster looked uneasy. Something in her voice, measured, unwavering, made the room hold its breath. It wasn't defiance. It was control. Still, the prosecutor pressed on. We have evidence, Thompson declared, waving papers dramatically. 3 companies lost millions because of her fake translations. Contracts failed, documents were rejected, proposals ruined. Each accusation was another dagger of shame. The gallery's whispers grew louder. But Kesha's calm didn't waver. If anything, she looked sad. Tell me, Mr. Thompson, she asked quietly. When did Global Tech decide my translation was wrong? Before or after they found out I didn't have a college degree? The room froze. Thompson fumbled his papers. That's irrelevant. And diplomatic solutions? She continued. Did they reject my work before or after learning I grew up in Mechanicsville? A ripple passed through the gallery. Everyone knew Mechanicsville, Atlanta's poorest housing project. Dr. Rodriguez stood again. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning raises issues of discrimination. Overruled, Foster barked. The defendant's background doesn't excuse fraud. Kesha looked straight at him. You said it's statistically unlikely for someone like me to speak 9 languages. May I ask, how many people like me do you actually know? Foster's face flushed red. Miss Williams, you are testing my patience. No, Your Honor, she said, voice soft but razor sharp. I'm testing whether this court judge's competence or appearance. A stunned silence hung in the air. And then, from the gallery, a frail voice broke through. I know that girl. An elderly woman with gray hair had risen from her seat. Mrs. Chun, a retired teacher. Kesha turned slightly, recognizing the voice. Their eyes met. And for a split second, something unspoken passed between them. A memory, a promise. Mrs. Chun took out her phone and began typing quickly. Meanwhile, Thompson pounced again, desperate to regain control. Your Honor, regardless of her clever words, we have expert verification that her translations were fraudulent. Experts? Kesha echoed, that faint, knowing smile returning. Interesting. I'd love to meet those experts. The ones who supposedly evaluated my work in Beijing dialects, or the differences between Moroccan and Egyptian Arabic, or academic versus commercial Russian. The room shifted. Linguists in the gallery leaned forward. That wasn't vocabulary of a pretender. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened. An elegant man entered, briefcase in hand. "Your Honor," he said, his voice commanding respect. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe I have evidence relevant to this case." The man introduced himself. Dr. James Morrison, retired ambassador to the United Nations. Foster frowned. "Dr. Morrison, this is a court in session. You can't just—" "I'll be brief," Morrison interrupted politely. "I've worked with translators for 30 years on diplomatic missions, and I can attest under oath. I know the work of Miss Kesha Williams." The courtroom went still. Even Kesha seemed momentarily stunned. Morrison opened his briefcase and produced a stack of official documents. "These are contracts and performance reviews from the United Nations, stamped and signed. Miss Williams worked as a freelance translator for 3 humanitarian missions, and her work was rated exceptional." Foster's expression collapsed. Thompson's papers fluttered helplessly in his hands. And Kesha closed her eyes, breathing deeply, as if unlocking a strength long restrained. When she opened them, her voice was calm, but filled with quiet power. "Your Honor," she said, "I accept your offer of a demonstration, but not as a spectacle for your amusement." "Not today," she turned, looking at every face in the room. "If this court truly seeks justice, then allow me to show not only that I speak 9 languages, but why 3 powerful companies would rather destroy a young black woman than let her compete in their world." No one moved, because deep down everyone could feel it. Something much bigger than a fraud case had just begun. When the court recessed, the air was electric, a storm about to break. Judge Foster had suspended the session for 2 hours, so Dr. Morrison could present his documents. Reporters flooded social media with headlines. "The polyglot on trial, judge's racist comment sparks outrage." But while the world argued outside, Kesha Williams was escorted to a small conference room behind the courtroom, handcuffs still tight around her wrists. Inside waited 3 people she didn't expect to see. Her lawyer, Dr. Elena Rodriguez, sat at the head of the table, calm but alert. Next to her, Mrs. Chun, the elderly teacher from the gallery, eyes glistening with emotion. And beside her, a young Asian man typing rapidly on a laptop, screens full of data flashing before him. At the far end of the table stood a tall, poised black woman in a navy suit, her presence sharp as glass. "Kesha," she said with a confident smile, "I'm Dr. Victoria Johnson, corporate litigation specialist. We've been waiting for you." Kesha blinked, confused. "Waiting for me?" Mrs. Chun stood, voice trembling but proud. "You've grown so much. Do you remember the Mandarin classes at the community library?" The memory hit Kesha like a wave. Friday evenings at the old brick library, sitting beside a dozen kids, learning words that opened new worlds. "Yes," she whispered. You taught me my first Chinese characters." Mrs. Chun smiled through her tears. "And when you left, I told myself, and that girl will go far. You learned in months what university students struggle to master in years." Kesha's throat tightened. "I thought you moved away." "I did," Mrs. Chun nodded. "To China. I spent 5 years there as an educational consultant. And when I heard about this case, I knew exactly who they were trying to destroy." She turned to the young man at the laptop. "This is Daniel Park, cybersecurity expert. He's been helping me for months." Daniel looked up briefly. "Hi, I've been digging into the companies accusing you. Global Tech, Diplomatic Solutions, and the International Aid Foundation." "What we found." He turned the laptop screen toward her. "We'll blow this case wide open." Rows of emails, documents, and chat logs filled the screen. Kesha leaned forward, her pulse quickening. "What am I looking at?" "Patterns," Daniel replied. All 3 companies coordinated rejections of freelancers without formal degrees, especially minorities. They shared blacklists, flagged certain names, and circulated coded language about who's safe to hire. You were on every list. Dr. Johnson slid a folder across the table. "They weren't just targeting you. They were protecting a monopoly, one that controls government translation contracts worth billions. You started winning clients that used to belong to their network, so they decided to destroy your credibility." Kesha stared at the evidence, disbelief turning to cold fury. Global Tech said my Mandarin was wrong, but I worked directly with their Chinese partners. They approved my work, Daniel nodded. Exactly. Here's the proof. He clicked a tab. A WhatsApp chat appeared between two Global Tech executives. Her translation's perfect. But no degree means no payment. Make up an excuse. Kesha exhaled slowly, trembling. They admitted it. Dr. Johnson's tone sharpened. And diplomatic solutions? They're even worse. They run 2 lists of translators, a premium one for Ivy League graduates, and an experimental diversity list where they assign freelancers from poor backgrounds. They approve your work internally, then publicly label it as substandard to justify their bias. Mrs. Chun placed another folder on the table. This one hurt the most, the International Aid Foundation. They rejected your Russian translation because it was too raw, too emotional. But that emotion came from refugees' voices. You preserved their truth. The Harvard translator they replaced you with polished it into cold bureaucracy. The UN rejected that version for sounding detached and artificial. For the first time since her arrest, Kesha felt tears sting her eyes. Everything they accused me of was their own doing. Exactly, Dr. Rodriguez said softly. They weren't protecting language. They were protecting hierarchy. Kesha sat back, her mind racing. You did all this in 3 days? Daniel smiled faintly. No, Mrs. Chun started 2 years ago. After one of her students, another multilingual freelancer, was blacklisted for unverified credentials. Your case was the spark that brought it all together. Mrs. Chun handed Kesha a thick envelope. Inside were 12 handwritten letters. Each told the same story. Talented freelancers, mostly people of color, labeled as frauds, their work erased, their careers destroyed. You're not alone anymore, Mrs. Chun said. You're the voice of all of us now. Silence filled the room, heavy, sacred, electric. Then Dr. Johnson leaned forward. Here's the plan. When we go back into court, Morrison will present his UN documents first to restore your credibility. Then Daniel will reveal the internal communications proving bias. And finally, Mrs. Chun will testify as an unregistered witness to expose the human cost of this system. Dr. Rodriguez nodded. And you, Kesha, you'll show them what real brilliance looks like. No papers, no degrees, just truth. Kesha took a deep breath. Let's do it. When they returned to the courtroom, everything had changed. The gallery was packed. Civil rights lawyers, international reporters, and faces from the freelance community. Even the air felt different, heavy with expectation. Judge Foster entered, his arrogance subdued. He had looked up Dr. Morrison's credentials during recess and discovered he wasn't a man to be dismissed. Dr. Morrison, Foster said, forcing politeness, you may proceed. Morrison rose, calm and deliberate. Your Honor, what we are about to show you will demonstrate that this case is not about fraud. It's about systematic discrimination. Thompson jumped up, voice cracking. Objection. That's beyond the scope. Overruled, Foster said quietly, curiosity betraying him. Proceed. The lights dimmed. Morrison connected his projector. The first slide appeared, a spreadsheet filled with numbers. Over the past decade, he began, minority freelancers, without formal academic degrees, have had their work rejected at rates 340% higher than their peers with university credentials, even when quality assessments show their translations were equally or more accurate. A murmur rippled through the room. The next slide showed emails from Global Tech executives discussing filtering out undesirable candidates. Then came an audio clip. Voices from Diplomatic Solutions Board meeting. Use subjective quality metrics, one voice said. Make sure the diversity hires don't pass internal review. Thompson was pale now. His papers shook in his hands. He tried to object again, but Foster silenced him with a glance, and then Mrs. Chun stood up from the gallery. Her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. Your Honor, may I speak? Foster hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. I am Professor Mei Chun, she said. 15 years ago, I taught Mandarin at a community library in Mechanicsville. One of my students was a teenage girl who learned in 6 months what most learn in 2 years. Today, that girl stands accused because this system cannot imagine that brilliance can grow from poverty. A hush fell over the courtroom. If this court truly seeks justice, Mrs. Chun continued, then it must ask not if Kesha Williams lied about her talent, but why a system conspired to erase it. Every camera was rolling. Every reporter was typing. Judge Foster could feel the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. He realized he was no longer presiding over a fraud case, but a reckoning, because what had begun as a trial for one woman was becoming a mirror for an entire nation. The courtroom was silent. No one breathed, no one moved. Judge Foster's gavel lay still on his desk, forgotten. For the first time in his long career, he didn't feel like the one in control. Dr. Morrison stood tall, eyes gleaming behind his glasses. Your Honor, the defense rests its case on one final exhibit, the truth, spoken in the very languages they tried to silence. He turned to Kesha. She rose slowly from her seat. Her chains had been removed. Her wrists still bore the red marks, but her voice was unbroken. She walked to the center of the courtroom, facing everyone, the judge, the lawyers, the cameras, the crowd. And then she began. 我的名字是凯莎·威廉姆斯. My name is Kesha Williams. 我不是骗子. I am not a fraud. A few people gasped. Then she switched to Russian. Я говорю правду, потому что язык — это не диплом. Это душа. I speak the truth because language is not a degree. It's a soul. Spanish followed, smooth and fiery. El conocimiento no se hereda. Se conquista. Knowledge isn't inherited, it's earned. Then French. Ils ont voulu m'effacer, mais j'ai appris à écrire dans chaque langue qu'ils utilisent pour nous taire. They tried to erase me, but I learned to write in every language they use to silence us. She turned to the crowd, her voice trembling, not with fear but power. Arabic, Swahili, Japanese, Korean, each word a blade, each sentence a bridge. Finally, she looked straight at the judge and spoke in English, her accent steady, her tone like fire meeting glass. You asked for proof, Your Honor, but the truth doesn't always wear a degree. Sometimes it wears hunger, sometimes it wears survival, and sometimes it wears me. The entire courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed forward. The gallery stood. Even the guards froze, caught between duty and awe. Judge Foster tried to speak, but his voice broke. He looked at Kesha, then down at his papers, then back at the crowd. For the first time, he seemed small. The court, he finally said, finds no evidence of fraud or misrepresentation. The charges are dismissed, effective immediately. The gavel struck once, but it sounded less like a verdict and more like a confession. Kesha didn't cheer. She simply closed her eyes, whispering to herself in Mandarin, Ziyu, freedom. Outside, the courthouse steps overflowed with people. Cameras flashed, microphones extended, chants began. Justice for Kesha. Talent has no color. Degrees don't define us. Dr. Johnson stood beside her, smiling proudly. Mrs. Chun clutched her hand. Daniel was already streaming live updates to millions around the world. A CNN reporter called it the trial that redefined merit. BBC named it the day the system spoke back. But Kesha didn't want fame. She wanted something deeper. Change. Weeks later, the 3 corporations that accused her were under federal investigation for discrimination and fraud. 2 CEOs resigned. One fled the country, and the world started listening to the people it once ignored. Kesha declined every talk show invitation. Instead, she started a foundation, the Language of Freedom, offering free translation training for underprivileged youth, immigrants, and refugees. Her motto was simple: if they won't open the door, learn every language until you can build your own. In the opening ceremony, she stood at the podium, humble, composed, radiant. Her voice carried not just across the room, but into the hearts of everyone watching online. They told me I didn't belong in their world. But what they never understood is that I could build my own. To every dreamer who's been told they're not enough, Learn, rise, and speak your truth in every tongue they try to silence. Because the system isn't broken. It was built that way. And we are the ones who will rebuild it. Applause thundered. But beneath it, something deeper stirred. A movement, a rebirth. That night, as she walked home under the city lights, Kesha paused at a small corner cafe. A young girl sat by the window, her laptop open, listening to a Mandarin audio lesson. Kesha smiled quietly. History, it seemed, was learning a new language. If Kesha's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share her voice, speak her truth, because every time you refuse to stay silent, you become part of the change she fought for. Watch, comment, and subscribe, not for the algorithm, but for the revolution of stories that deserve to be heard. Justice for Kesha. Language of freedom. Underdog triumph. Systemic truth. Voices unchained.